Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are going to have a great presentation on blockchain, and I am Becky Garrettson. I'm the Executive Director for Eagle Forum of Alabama. We are a conservative grassroots organization that advocates for family policy that promotes and protects and helps families flourish, not only in the state of Alabama, but nationally as well. Anna Young is our Huntsville Action Group leader, and she is actually the host for the evening tonight, but she asked me to go ahead and open us up. And I want to tell you a little bit about our speaker. Jay Young is our speaker tonight. In his professional life, he worked as an Army combat medic, 91B. He was a Special Forces candidate 18 times, a consultant, senior project manager, senior business analyst, director of enterprise resource planning, a chief financial officer in a range of industries, including manufacturing, supply chain management, technology, travel, industrial design, telecommunication, previous metals, and the military. In various countries as well, not just the United States, but in India, Singapore, South Africa, Japan, the Philippines, and Honduras. It's been a great journey for him. He feels fortunate to have these life experiences. He has been involved with Bitcoin since the end of 2012, and during that time, he's expanded his knowledge of how Bitcoin works, how it can be applied to our lives, and why it's so important for humanity and the cause of individual liberty. He has spoke about Bitcoin to this group specifically in Huntsville and in several other different action groups across the state. And that's kind of his passion. He loves to do that. So if any of you hear this and you want to know more about Bitcoin, you can reach out to Jay. I'm sure he would love to talk to you more about that. He received his BS in mechanical engineering from the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And tonight, Jay will be discussing how blockchain technology works and the many possible applications of blockchain, including protecting our elections. So with that, I just want to welcome everyone. And Jay, I'll pass it over to you. And again, if you have trouble with your streaming capabilities, any of you folks out there, if your bandwidth gets low, just turn your camera off. And for those of you who are in and out or want to share this presentation when we're done, we will make this available on YouTube so you can watch it again and invite your friends to watch. So thank you, Jay, for hosting and being with us tonight. Oh, and your microphone is, let me ask you to unmute. There you go.
Thanks so much, Becky. I really appreciate that kind introduction. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much for everyone for appearing, and especially considering it's about to snow tonight in Huntsville. So, but I think we have people from all over the country coming in. So that's very, very good. That means we've got really good reach. So as Becky talked about, I'll be presenting a little bit about some of the fundamentals of blockchain technology. It's a little technical. I do try to keep it to a minimum, but it's abstracted enough that I think everyone can really kind of pick up the concepts. We'll go through a mock-up of a blockchain on an Excel spreadsheet. And some of you know a little bit about Bitcoin. It's not going to be that technical, right? But I think everyone will be able to follow along in the mock-up blockchain that we do in Excel. And we'll also talk about possible applications within elections, because that's kind of what this comes down to. And let me just preface this by saying, even though blockchain is kind of the backbone of Bitcoin, I think that there are applications for election integrity. And if you understand how blockchains work, you'll understand how we can kind of make that conceptual jump from encryption or mathematics and hashing functions to election integrity. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and give me just a second. Okay, screen one, and I'm going to share. Okay, can everyone see this okay?
If you can make it full screen.
Yeah, I'll make it full screen.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. Oh, I want to preface this also by saying that in my Bitcoin presentation, I had asked that all questions and comments be held to the end, till the Q&A section, because each section builds on the next section. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation. That's not a problem. As I said before, it is a little technical. I do try to keep it to a minimum, but I completely understand if the concepts are new and you want to ask for a little bit of clarification or anything like that. Let's see if I can get this going, and just bear with me for a moment. And let me flip this around. Oh, sugar. Okay, here we go. Let's do. Okay, can you see the full size?
Yes, great.
Version? Okay, great. All right, so basically what we're looking for is transparency via technology. I think that's the most important thing. And as we go through some of the first principles, I think the people here will understand why that's so important and how we've gotten to this point. The basic agenda is, let's take a look at the current landscape. And when I say current landscape, we can probably go back about 8 to 15 years in terms of how things have evolved in regards to elections, whether they be held at the federal, state, county, or local level. We'll look at some election goals and guidelines, and these are kind of high-level first principle look at what we probably can all agree on in terms of what elections should be, how they should proceed. We'll try to define a blockchain, and we'll try to apply the principles of blockchain through an actual example on an Excel spreadsheet. That's just a mock-up. We'll have a few caveats, all right, because nothing is perfect, even though we try to move that way. We'll look at some possible current applications, specifically in the country of, I think it's El Salvador, possibly, and look at some next steps that we can possibly take as a group, and then I'll open up the floor to a Q&A. And as I said before, feel free to pop in if you need some clarification or explanation of the concept. So in the current landscape, I think it's safe to say many people do not trust the election process, right, in terms of being something that is open and transparent. There's a lack of process transparency. There's a lack of voting record transparency. We're seeing fraud in vote collections and vote counting. There's also instances, and this goes all the way back to the 2000 election, of vote selection ambiguity. So if you remember the whole concept of hanging chads, and we saw this in the Bush v. Gore United States Supreme Court case of 2000. There was a big problem there because of hanging chads. There are instances where the voting process is prone to vote harvesting, instances of identity theft, and even instances of record storage durability has been called into question. I think during the 2020 presidential election, if I remember correctly, there was a basement in Georgia that had a pipe burst, and hundreds, if not thousands, of ballots were destroyed in that so-called broken pipe disaster. These are some major things that we're dealing with in terms of challenges with our voting process, and I think consequently the culture, the needle of our culture has moved quite a bit to one of distrust. So I think that we can kind of use these 4 basic principles for election goals and guiding principles. And I know it's going to sound very strange at the outset, the way I present it, but I think once we see how blockchain can be implemented and maybe applied to elections, I think you may agree that these should be the goals and guiding principles. Number 1, trustless. We need to obviate the need for trusting counterparties. And when I say counterparties, these are any institution or individuals who we trust to do the right thing, whether it be through good intentions or actually following a process, and that they're not deliberately sabotaging or accidentally miscounting votes. Transparency, ensuring that the voting process is executed by the rules, and it's not done on an ad hoc basis. I think we saw, even from going back to 2000, Bush v. Gore, there were entire instances of rules not being followed properly, and the Supreme Court finally had to put a stop to, I think it was a county in Florida, saying you can't just keep recounting. You actually have to follow your own rules. Distributed, the data and the method of creating trusted states and transparency. And when I say states, meaning the count of the votes, if you will. And when I say distributed, I don't mean that everyone can see what my votes are, Jay Young's votes are, meaning we can verify that there was a vote by a valid voter, and we can all see that this anonymized voter voted for politician A and politician B and politician C. It's completely open, it's transparent, but there are ways of anonymizing the voters while also validating that they are actual legitimate voters. And it should be decentralized. No single body is controlling the administration of the votes or the voter rolls, the processes, and the actual outcome. And I think that at first that may seem a little odd because we're so used to having these records being centrally controlled for so long. But I think once we start to see how blockchain can be used, and we'll have something called distributed ledger, we'll see that a decentralized ledger, a public ledger, is probably actually the way we need to go. So I'm using some terminology. Some of this is mathematics related. I'm not going to get into the actual mathematics because my math isn't that great. But I will try to abstract it as much as possible, and I will try to reuse the terminology so that way you hear it one time, you hear it multiple times. So when we think of encryption, that's basically codes or encoding information. You remember the old Ovaltine decoder ring, right? Or if you saw the Imitation Game, it was a great movie with Benjamin, I always butcher his last name, Cumberbatch, great actor, and that was about breaking the Enigma code machine in World War II. And there's an entire science around encryption and decryption. A one-way function is a math equations that are easy to lock but hard to unlock. So if you think of a padlock, right, it's easy to take a padlock and lock it, right? You push the two pieces together, very easy, very simple, and it doesn't take a lot of knowledge to do that, but it's really difficult to open the lock. You either need an incredible amount of brute force to do so, or you need a key to put in the lock, right, and to unlock it, and you actually have to have the key. You actually have to have the right key for that lock. Elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, or ECDSA, is a specific type of one-way function, all right? And the best way I can describe it is it's like a massive roulette wheel that you spin and you don't know where it's going to land. A hash is a mathematically compact way of representing a set of data. Similarly to the way a fingerprint is a representation of a person. So if we know about fingerprints and how important they are for forensic investigation. If I were to leave my thumbprint or something, chances are pretty good if my fingerprints are on file with FBI, then it would be very easy for someone to say, oh yeah, that fingerprint belongs to Jay. So the fingerprint is not me. The fingerprint is a representation of me. And in this case, SHA 256, which is this section right here, that's one of the encryption algorithms that's used for creating hashes. In fact, it actually stands for secure hashing algorithm. And the 256 has to do with the number of bits or the number of ones and zeros that comprise that key, just like on that padlock that we talked about a minute ago. A digital signature is a way of proving that you are who you claim to be using encryption and one-way functions or a specific type of hash. So An example would be if you ever seen some movies where people have literally signed a document in blood where they stamp their thumb or finger in blood, and then they can literally sign a document with their fingerprint on there. Conceptually, that's basically what you're doing right there, is you're taking something as a representation of you, your thumbprint, your fingerprint, and you're actually pressing it onto some document. Doing that is very simple, very easy to do, doesn't require special knowledge, but replicating that thumbprint would require extra effort and extra knowledge on how to do that. That's kind of a one-way function there. A block is a group of transactions that are all combined into a single set. Now, for the purpose of Bitcoin, we're talking about financial transactions. And for this application here, for votes or in elections, a single vote where person A votes for candidate B, that's a vote. Or person A votes for topic or issue C, such as issuing a bond. And the final piece is a blockchain is a series of blocks strung together where an earlier block affects a later block. And we'll see that in action. Normally in, let's say, accounting, you may have a page of accounting transactions, and a previous accounting transaction may not affect a newer accounting transaction. In blockchain, it absolutely does affect an older transaction does affect a newer transaction, and we'll see that in action. Okay, so blockchain, and when we talk about Bitcoin or anything that's similar to that, it's typically built on three pillars. Encryption, when we talk about encryption, that's like the decoder ring or the Nazi Enigma coding machine, right? And that's where you're taking information that you can readily read, such as a page of text, and you put it through some encoding function, and what comes out after that is something that to the human eye looks like gobbledygook. It's just scribble, right? We cannot read it readily, so it has been encoded. When we talk about the next part, the next pillar is a blockchain, and think of sequential pages in accounting ledger. So if I have pages in an accounting book, and at the end of every page, I simply count the total number of characters on that page, and then I take that number and I move it to the next page, and then I do the same thing. I count all of the characters on that page, and I add it to the previous example, previous page's summary, and then I come up with a new number. So now the two pages are linked together. Distributed ledger or public ledger means everyone gets a copy. So in this case, if I had an accounting ledger and there were financial transactions in there, or if we had an election and we had votes in there, everyone could get a copy. Anyone who wanted a copy of that record could get a copy, assuming everything was anonymized properly. And with the advent of computers, doing that is very, very quick, very easy, and very, very inexpensive. Working together in unison creates a singular solution. In other words, and demotivating people from doing the wrong thing. I know in theory that sounds very simple, very straightforward. That's kind of your ideal case. And as we build our mock-up blockchain, hopefully you'll see how people are motivated to do the right thing and demotivated from doing the wrong thing. In fact, we demotivate people from doing the wrong thing by making the wrong action or the immoral action, the unethical action, cost more than simply doing the right thing. So that's kind of your ideal situation. All right, so the first pillar, encryption. In this case, we talked about a mathematical fingerprint of some data. And the best way to describe it is a compact representation of some larger set of data. All right. And for the purpose of this, It doesn't matter if we're talking about 1 character or 1 gigabyte of data. There's a way to mathematically push all that data through a formula, and out pops a singular number that's of a fixed length. In this case, 256 bits long. A signature is just it's encoded numerical and anonymous representation of a person or party, okay? And in this case, it's a specific type of hash. It's also a one-way mathematical function. When we talk about blockchain, the best definition I've ever heard is a blockchain is a continually updated record of who owns what. In this case, it is both immutable and dynamic. And I know that sounds strange to have immutable and dynamic in the same description. They should be contradictory, but I think we'll see that something can be both immutable and dynamic. And it's also transparent and verifiable, meaning if you have all these pages in your accounting ledger that are linked to each other, any person can open them up. And if they know the rules, if everyone knows the rules of how to do accounting and how to link page 2 back to page 1, then everyone can verify that this is a legitimate accounting book or legitimate accounting record. So by pushing out to anyone who wants it, it becomes transparent and verifiable. And finally, the third pillar is the distributed ledger, public ledger. Every interested party or anyone who wants it can get a copy of the blockchain. Anyone can analyze the blockchain because everyone should have a common set of the rules. Everyone can cross-check each other. So if I think there were about a dozen of us who were in the room together, we could all distribute copies of the blockchain to each other. And because computers have made things so cheap to deliver, I mean to transmit, to store over hard drives, to analyze and cross-check, we could all cross-check each other's copies of the blockchain or this ledger. As I said before, taken in totality, the 3 pillars are extremely reliable and hardened against attacks. And my favorite example is Bitcoin. Bitcoin's been going for 16 years now, and there has never been a fraudulent transaction injected into the blockchain. It has worked very, very well. And part of how it does this is that when I talked before about we all have copies of the blockchain, amongst each other, if one party has a copy of the blockchain that doesn't match everyone else's, then the majority would actually reject that one person's ledger. So rejecting any one ledger which does not match the majority. And in this case, in terms of the punishment, the majority doesn't have to do anything to that one person who is not conformant with the majority's cross-checked blockchain or ledgers. In this case, the punishment is wasted time, energy, and effort. And we'll see how that happens. But for the most part, the person who acts unethically, they're actually punishing themselves because they will put time, energy, and effort to create a fraudulent record or fraudulent ledger. And everyone is going to reject that person's ledger. And so that person's wasted their time, energy, and effort. Okay, so we've kind of gone from some of the current culture around elections. We've talked about some terminology here, and let's get into how do blockchains actually work. So a block is basically a page in an accounting ledger with transactions, or in this case, votes. A hash is a mathematical method of authentication, all right? Or in this case, it's taking a large set of data and making it very compact, so it's represented kind of like a fingerprint. And a signature is a specific type of hash. In this case, it's to verify one specific transaction, whether it be financial or vote. Okay, so we're going to go through this together, and I'm going to call up the Excel spreadsheet. but here's what I'm going to build for everyone. We have one page in a ledger which contains a series of transactions such as Alice bought one apple for $1 and Bob sold one apple for $1. Okay, we'll see signatures of every participant, which would be like Alice's hash of that transaction, and then we'll see Bob's hash or fingerprint of that transaction. Okay, and then we'll have all these different transactions. Okay, we're going to take all that, we're going to send it through a hashing function, and out of all those transactions that are put together, we will get a hash, which is going to look something like this right here. The output of the block of these votes or these financial transactions will look something like this right here. And taken in totality, all the transactions, all the signatures, the hash output put together will create what we call a block. All right, and then we're going to put that together, and we'll have multiple blocks that will be strung together, head to tail, and that will create a blockchain. Okay, so let me call up my spreadsheet. And can you see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's cover a hash, just a basic hash. I took a set of data, in this case, it's just the numbers 1, 2, 3, and I put them through this little engine, this little formula, and out of that pops this thing over here. It's a long string of characters, okay? And it looks random, and from our point of view, it is random. And to use the mathematical term or the term of physics, we would say it's non-deterministic. Meaning, if I give you this number right here, I cannot guess what this number is going to be over here, this string of text here. The only way I can go from here to here is if I use that SHA-256 hashing function, okay? There's no shortcut to this. As compared to, let's say, when we took algebra, and we used graphs, you had your x-axis and your y-axis, and there was some method of shortcutting. If I give you an x, you can pop out a y because you know what the formula is to go from x to y, right? And for those of you who are the nerds out there, y equals mx plus b, right? That's a very short and compact way of representing every single value of x that corresponds with every single value of y. So here's another one right here. Is ABC, you'll see, gives us a completely different string of characters or a completely different hash. And this string of characters right here, this is 64 characters long. If you were to represent this in what we call binary, which is just ones and zeros, it would be 256 bits long. Here's another one right here. I just took ABC 1, 2, 3, and you get a completely different hash. Okay. Now let's change this around a little bit. Going back to the example from algebra, if I were to change, let's say, if I had the old formula y equals mx plus b, if I change x to go from, let's say, 3 to 4, the value of my input goes from 3 to 4. Basically, the value of y is pretty much going to go up by 1 or up by 2. It's going to go by some well-known, easily determined amount. All right, so you're going to have pretty much a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 relationship there. With hashing functions, it doesn't work like that. We would think in normal algebraic terms, if I go from 123 to 124, we may think, oh, well, this is going to increase from 3 to 4 right over here. Well, this is the cool part about hashing functions. I'm going to change this. I'm going to increment it by 1 from 3 to 4. And I want everyone kind of pay attention. It's hard to see because it's so long, but just pay attention to what happens here. We get an entirely different set of characters that pop up here. All right. And this is showing that the non-deterministic nature of hashing functions. Okay. And we can do the same thing again. I can go from 124 to 125. and a completely different number shows up. As I said before, it's kind of like spinning the roulette wheel and throwing the ball around a very, very large roulette wheel, and you don't really know where the ball is going to land. All right. Even if you make a small change in the initial velocity of that ball, you're going to land in a completely different part of the roulette wheel. Okay. I know it's kind of abstracted, but I think everyone kind of gets that. If you don't, feel free to stop me. It's not a problem. Okay. So let's take a look at a set of transactions. And I don't know if this sidebar is, if that is, yeah, is that okay? Is that
Yes.
showing? Okay.
Can you do your cursor around it again? Just to make sure.
Right here, like
Yes,
that?
we can see. Yes, we can see that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right. As said before, we have a series of transactions. On this day, Alice bought, I'm sorry, let me just change this. Alice bought one apple for one whatever, let's call it $1. And Bob sold Alice that apple for $1. Okay. And for the accountants out there, I apologize if I have my debits and credits reversed. I didn't mean to get that wrong. So we have a basic transaction, and then right here we have the transaction hash. We could call this the fingerprint of this transaction, and we're using that same SHA-256 hashing algorithm, right, to hash this set of data. And one thing I should say is, going back over here, no matter how many characters are here, whether it be 3 characters or 6 characters or 10,000 characters, this is always going to be the same 64 characters long or 256 characters. It's always going to be the same length in there. So I'm never going to have a hash that's only 3 characters long. So going back here, I have a transaction hash that is just some number. And we can go down, do the same thing for all these transactions here and all their representative hashes. Okay, so this hash represents this transaction and so on and so on. What I can also do is I can actually take a hash of all of these hashes, because this is just data right here. I can have all this outputted, and that's this right here where it says block hash. That's this right here. Okay, it's arbitrary, but it's also very unique. It's a representation. This hash is a representation of all of this data right here. Okay, and call it a block hash. I did duplicate it right here, and we'll see why that happens in a couple minutes. Okay, so when I put all this data together, I have my data fields here, right? The header, the names of the headers, field headers, all the transaction hashes, and then the entirety of that all hashed together. I'm going to call that a block. One, and in fact, I'm going to call this block 1. So this is just virtual. It's just a virtual container. It's just a way of taking a whole slew of transactions, putting them together in some arbitrary amount, and just saying, okay, I'm going to enter that into my ledger. I'm going to do the same thing here with block 2. And I'm just repeating the same thing. Instead of apples, I got pears and trucks and condos and what have you. I'm doing the same thing, transactions and hashes and a whole bunch of hashes, and these hashes right here are put together into a hash, this right here. But I'm doing one thing different. In block 2 and all the subsequent blocks, not only am I hashing all this data, I'm compactifying it together, I'm also taking the hash from the previous block and I'm going to feed all that together. And once I do that, I now have a blockchain or a chain of blocks. So that way, whatever this is right here, this number, this set of characters, it's actually dependent upon whatever I get back here as well. Okay, now here's the cool thing about it. This right here it looks arbitrary, and it kind of is. This is a representation of all this and all of this back here. So remember, just like a fingerprint is not the person, a fingerprint is a representation of the person. This hash right here is a representation of the entire history of all the transactions that have ever occurred. And I can put that together. That's block 2. I can do the same thing with block 3, same thing with block 4. And in each instance, I've tied block 3 to block 2 and block 4 to block 3. Once we have that, we now have our chain of blocks or blockchain. Let me just pause right here. Is anyone here struggling with this? Anyone here want me to kind of go over that? Speak up, please.
I have a question. Say block 2.
Mhm.
Wouldn't you need its own block hash prior to being combined with block 1?
So that's a good question. So without getting too much into Excel, what I'm doing is I'm taking, so F13, you can see this formula. That's this hash right here. And I'm also taking, it's hard to see, F18 through F27. That's this right here.
Okay.
So I don't have to have block 2's hash just by itself. It's perfectly fine to say, take all this data right here, all these hashes, and just combine it with this right here. That's perfectly fine.
The reason I ask is how do you pinpoint where the problem is?
We'll get in. That's a good question.
Okay.
Yep, that's the right question. Anyone else? Okay. All right. So, as my mom said, what about a problem? So let's say Alice bought 1 apple and Bob sold 1 apple. So he gave up an apple and received dollars back. So in this case, he's going to say, oh, well, it wasn't $1, it was $2. So what I'm going to change this from 1 to 2. And what I'd like you to watch right here is this, from 1 to 2. And you can see this changes radically, just like we saw in this back here. If I merely change this from 125 to 124, this changes radically. Same thing with this. I'm going to change this to 1. This is the original. And when I change it back to 2, it's a radically different string of characters. In addition, this also changed down here. So I'm going to change this back to 1. You can see that this is the calculated hash, and this is just all I do is just copy from this cell to this cell, just a string of characters. Okay, this is the original one. When I change this from 1 to 2, not only does this cell change, but as expected, the entire hash, the block of the entire hash changes. Okay, so this has radical outcomes for this hash, which is a signature, and it has radical outcomes for this right here. And we can see, because this is the original hash of the entire block, before I changed it from 1 to 2, here's the new hash when I change it from 1 to 2. And these two are completely different. Okay, does that make sense to everyone so far? Anyone not getting that? Your silence is consent. Okay, so Bob may say, well, let's also let's see how this works in the blockchain. So I'm going to change this back to 1, and so that's good. And if I go to block 2, remember block 2 is chained to block 1. Here's my calculated hash right here. Remember, this is a hash of all these hashes and block 1's hash. When I change this from 1 to 2, this signature or this hash changes, the block hash changes, and this one changes. So here's the interesting part about it. Nothing in this entire block changed, okay? This hash is still good. Bob didn't try to scam anyone on this transaction. Everything is exactly the same right up to here. So if nothing changed here, how did this change? How did this hash change? Because it was tied to the previous hash. So that kind of gets back to your original question, Bob, is don't you actually have to have this block have its own hash? Not necessarily. All right. As long as the previous block's hash is tied in to the new block's hash. And we could say the same thing about block 3. Nothing's changed in block 3, yet we can see a difference between the newly calculated hash and the original hash before Bob started meddling with the blockchain, or his record, his version of the blockchain. So let's say we all come along here and we're ready to do some transactions together, and everyone's doing their work. They're getting ready to put a whole bunch of transactions together to create block 4. And somebody notices, well, wait a second. All these transactions, we're all using the same rules. We're all using the same mathematics. And for some reason, Bob has a hash that he's getting this right here. But when we run the transactions, when we run the hashes, we're getting this string of characters right here. There's a difference between these two right here. Oh, that's strange. Something's happened here. So now everyone can open up their respective ledgers and they can start sharing. Now, in reality, that would be really difficult, but because of computers, because of broadband, doing this is all very fast and all automatic. So they start to do some root cause analysis and they go back. Well, let's take a look at block 3. Well, block 3, oh, that's different. That's not good. What's going on? Let's go back to block 2. Block 2 is off. Well, these two hashes are different. By the way, remember, the original, this is everyone else's copy of the ledger, their copy of the blockchain, and Bob is the only one who has this version right here. Well, that's strange. So they go back to the very beginning and they start comparing transactions. And everyone says, well, wait a second. Our ledger shows that Bob only received $1. Bob, you're saying that you sold that apple for $2. What's going on here? This isn't right. We reject your transaction. Okay. So Bob's like, and they tell Bob, don't come back to us until you show us that you've arrived at the same hash that we all have. You have to have this hash right here, and it has to be the same. If you come back with this hash or anything else, we're going to reject your transactions. Bob's like, oh, fine, whatever. So what does Bob try to do? Because he's a little scammer, he's going to try to find a way to change things around. He's like, well, easy peasy. All I got to do is pick a number here that gives me the same hash that I had previously. And just so we're clear, he has to pick a number here that gives him that number or that string of characters right here. He has to do the same thing. So he's like, oh, I can do that. That's easy peasy. I'm going to choose a 2. Oh, that's different. That didn't work. And what he's looking for is for this hash to be exactly the same as before, or to be exact same as that one right there. That's the original. Well, that didn't work. So he tries 3. Well, that didn't work. He tries 4. That didn't work. And you'll see these are not matching up at all. He could be here till the cows come home. He could try 10,001 and it's completely different. Bob could be trying for a very long time. In fact, Bob could be trying for an age longer than the age of the universe. That's a long time, and Bob is probably going to be dead by then. The point is, in Bob trying to scam the system, the only one he's actually scamming is himself. He can sit here and try to come up with a number that helps him get to this hash right here, but he's probably not going to be able to do it. And even if he did, this transaction is going to be really gooned up. Everyone will be able to go back through the blockchain and see this is a fraudulent transaction. Even if he does get that number, or he gets this hash to agree with that hash, the transactions are going to be wrong. And so Bob is actually punishing himself. And this goes back to the original first principle, which is motivate people to do the right thing, demotivate people from doing the wrong thing, and people punish themselves for doing the wrong thing. The best thing Bob can do is just admit he was a bit of a scammer, set this back to 1, play by the rules, and actually just become a productive member of society. In this case, it takes us back to here. All right. So I hope that kind of answers your question, which is how do you, what are the consequences of doing something quote unquote wrong, unethical, immoral, and how do you pinpoint where something happened? Okay. I want to do one tiny little variant of this, which is we did it in block 1. We had that fraudulent transaction block 1. I'm going to carry it and do it in block 2. All right. And we can see from block 2, this is different. Block 3, this is different. Block 4, this is different. And in block 1, we can see they're the same. And I'm going to open this up to the floor. Does anyone want to tell me why it is that block 2, 3, and 4 are different, but block 1 is the same? And have a chat.
You didn't block 1.
That's right. Exactly. He didn't impact block 1. He didn't do anything in block 1. And errors or fraudulent transactions only affect that block and all subsequent blocks, not previous blocks. Okay. So I hope that kind of makes sense to everyone. So we see, to kind of summarize this, we see how hashing transactions signatures work, how they can secure a block. They can chain together blocks to create a chain of blocks or a blockchain, and that allows for almost instantaneous recognition that A, a problem happened, and B, where it happened, and C, who was really the fraudster, if you will, who's the bad actor in this whole thing. So let me pull this down. All right, any questions on that so far? Okay, let me open this back up.
Yeah, yes, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Since you started the presentation by talking about election.
Yeah.
Election casting votes is a one-way street. And the example that you used are buying and selling. Like how would that be different? So long as each one has its own.
How would it be different? How is it the same, you mean?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
how is it the same?
Okay, so in this case, if I can do this. So let's say I were to change this instead of dollar amounts. So that's a good question. Instead of dollar amounts, let's say that this is, let's call it political office, right? So let's call it office. And this would be the vote, okay? For this one, let's say it's presidential office, okay? And for this one is, I'm going to choose, candidate A, candidate B, candidate C, all right? So in this case, it's going to be the presidential vote, and this is going to be for candidate A. Okay. And I hope you can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. So instead of calling it the type of transaction, credits and debits, we can say the type of vote. Okay. Presidential, U.S. Senate, U.S. Representative, et cetera, right? And of course, you can take it all the way down from the federal, state, county, and local. Okay. So all of us can vote for the president, all right? But I cannot necessarily vote for a candidate in a completely different district, or I cannot vote for a senator in, let's say, Arkansas. And that could all be represented here, okay? And then the actual vote, how people are voting, would be here. And I don't know if you saw it, but as I changed this from, let's say, credit to debit, or credit and debit to presidential and then candidate A, you notice the transaction hash changed as well. So if I can move this over, yeah. So this just kept changing every time. And then what we can do is to make this applicable, we could change this right here. It could be Alice votes for the president. And this could also be Alice votes for a bond issuance, right? In this case, the office or issue, right? And this could be bond 1, right? And in this case, it could be set to no. So I hope this is kind of starting to resonate. Is it doesn't matter if it's financial data. From the mathematical point of view, data is just data, right? It's the way that we as humans interpret it. That's the issue. And the most important thing is this right here is a unique identifier, all right? It's non-deterministic, meaning we cannot predict what it's going to be, and it's unique to this exact set, or this exact set of data, or concatenation of data. And we could even go so far as to say, once maybe 100 people have voted in all their votes, we can put them together, and you can choose whether it be 100, 1,000, a dozen, whatever it is, doesn't matter. We can bundle all those up together, and then we have all their signatures. So Alice's signature for this vote, right, is right here. All those votes cast by all these different people create a set of signatures or hashes. And then when they bundle them all together, that creates a singular hash for that block, okay? And as when the next group of people come in, they vote, same thing just like this right here, and that creates the next set of hashes, right? And in a way, that's not much different than how things are done on the electronic voting machines. Is they're required throughout the night to send in the vote tallies as they go in. The only difference is that right now there isn't anything like a transaction hash, right? And those voting machines right now are prone to fraud, because sometimes all the candidates, or not all of the options, are available when the person votes, or sometimes it's actually changed inside the voting machine, so that way the reports that go back to the central location are actually they're fraudulent, right? If you have hashes, you have a blockchain, you have a distributed ledger, right, and you have signatures, every voter can actually go back and verify on the blockchain, okay, I know how I voted, and what's shown in the blockchain actually matches with how I voted. So even if there is something fraudulent happening in the voting machine, the voter will know it. That's the cool thing about it, right? So because all the rules are the same. And we'll take a look at this in just a minute, of what's something called a blockchain explorer for Bitcoin, but the principle is still the same. So I kind of want to make sure I'm addressing your your concerns, like how does this match for voting? Am I making the case?
Yeah, does that mean the voter have to be educated enough to learn how to read this?
So
You could certainly develop tools, in my
yeah,
opinion.
Okay.
exactly,
Okay.
right. So if you think about it, in terms of what does a driver need in a vehicle? And I apologize for this, it's going to seem like an odd tangent, but what does a voter really need? A driver need to drive. They need to know that they can steer the vehicle, they can go forward and backwards, right? That's pretty much it, right? In terms of what the driver actually does. But if you actually look under the hood, there are literally dozens of functions that are happening, right? Whether they've been mechanical or electromechanical or cyber, right? There all these different things that are happening. And the designers and engineers of these vehicles have abstracted all of these different functions away. So that way the driver knows I go forward, I go backwards, I steer.
And that's what the tools that Suzanne, that's what you're talking about.
Yes, think about something like IV3, for example, that we've
Right.
looked at recently. It's a very simple tool, but it gives you a lot of power, and you don't have to know what's happening necessarily behind the scene.
Mm-hmm.
So with this, I mean, it's a lookup that you want to be able to do. So somebody could create tools into the blockchain that would allow you to do that.
Yeah. For everybody, Suzanne is you are trained as a computer.
Yes, software developer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So she's very, very well, very knowledgeable on this.
Thank you.
And you're bringing up a good question in regards to people have to be educated. Well, in the same way that we hope that people are educated enough to read, that they can actually read their ballot.
Mhm.
I think this is just another step. And I think if people are educated enough and we have the proper tools that
Tools.
abstract away all this stuff, I think it's definitely a viable solution. I just want to take 30 seconds to talk about this website. This website called mempool.space. For those of you who know a little bit about Bitcoin, this is a blockchain explorer, and these right here are blocks of transactions, just like we saw in the Excel spreadsheet, where blocks that have actually been created previously, and these are blocks that are about to be validated. Okay, within this right here, I can open this up and I can see all this information, and I can actually take a look at a block right here, sorry, transaction, and everything's open and transparent. And I may not necessarily be able to see, I can see one transaction, right? And here is a hash or an address that is anonymous, okay? And so I keep trying to stress this whole idea of openness and transparency, yet also anonymous. So
So this website basically created the tool that average users can and just can know what's going on, sort of know what's
that's
going
right. They can navigate it and understand what's going on. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah, that's a very good observation. And so I think that that's important. And you'll notice all I did was just click. I didn't have to do anything special, right? So I'm not trying to say this is exactly the way to go, and I'm not trying to say it's easy. It's going to be difficult, right? But I will say, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I think that the technical part is the easiest part.
Mhm.
The hardest part is going to be moving the cultural needle.
Yes.
All right. So I hope that's helpful. Okay. So does anyone else want to comment on, at least in terms of trying to adapt blockchain to voting, or at least make it specific to voting?
I have a question and a comment.
Yes, sir.
I have a crypto account,
Mhm.
and it was hacked without my knowledge.
Mhm.
And they sold one crypto asset and bought one other.
Mhm.
And when I contacted the holder and tried to figure it out, they sent me roughly 10 pages of transactions. For that one transaction resulted in about 10 pages of transactions.
Mhm.
And it was so complicated, I spent really a day trying to find out exactly that I end up with the correct amount.
So what, I'm sorry, what's your question?
Well, my question is going to be, is that it's so complex when you look at the transaction hash that I think that extremely knowledgeable programmers could potentially
So
set up an interface.
let's cut this. I don't mean, I'm not trying to cut you off, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So first off, this is not the scope for financial transactions. And also, did you have your crypto on an exchange?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so I apologize for being so blunt, but that was your problem. You shouldn't have had your crypto on an exchange. The crypto was not hacked. Your account was hacked.
Okay.
So I'm so sorry that happened to you. I don't like to see bad things happen to good people, but I hope that's a lesson learned, that you never keep your crypto on an exchange. You always keep your crypto in your own wallet.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, and related to? Yeah, go ahead.
A quick thought. It seems like the challenge will not necessarily be finding a blockchain that works, but finding a way to get the entrenched people that are benefiting from the current system to give up the benefits that they're getting to go to a blockchain like this.
Yes.
Bingo.
Wholeheartedly,
Bingo.
wholeheartedly agree with you, Joe. That's well said. Okay, so let's see if I can put this together. Okay, so from here, I'm going to, okay, can you folks see that okay? Blockchain applied?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So what we're trying to do is three basic steps. Recording the vote, meaning the date and the time, the voter's signature, which can be done anonymously, the vote hash, the block hash, okay? All that goes together, kind of what we saw together in that example, and changes are public and transparent. Verification, voters can verify all the above in their votes via direct search in the blockchain, like we saw mempool.space, that website. Aggregation, anyone can aggregate all transactions to arrive at the same numbers and conclusion. So I hope that kind of ticks and ties the entire thing, is that everyone can get a copy of the blockchain, and this has been happening for 16 years, okay? Everyone can open up the blockchain that they've downloaded, and they can verify all these transactions, whether they want to do it manually or have a computer do it. And there are actual tools that can actually start to aggregate transactions together. And we can all arrive at the same numbers in conclusion. And no one party has super secret special access. Dovrete, no provete. The old Russian saying, trust but verify, as President Reagan used to say. Okay. All right. So, election blockchain challenges. Let's just call it what it is. We have a technologically challenged population. You know, we're still kind of moving from the 70s, and here it is, 50 years later. We're still getting used to things like signature management, which is like forgetting your password, right? Hardware and software construction. We've heard about Dominion and Diebold, all right? Hardware and software maintenance, hardware and software integrity, and blockchain storage and visibility, right? These are not obstacles. These are challenges to be overcome. Okay, so where's the obstacle, right? I don't think the obstacle is with this. If we talk about layers, right? Here are the voters. Here's where the votes are cast, and then here's where the votes are recorded in this supposed future model. I don't think the problem is with the voters. My personal opinion is, I don't think the problem is here in the blockchain, right? Because it's math. It's all open and transparent. The challenge is right here in the voting software, right? And if it's and we're seeing that challenge right now. We know, forensically speaking, this is where a lot of the problem has been for years. All right. I do think that there are ways of objectively, transparently fixing this, right? If we use encryption, if we use blockchain technology properly. All right, so some caveats, election fundamentals and principles. We want to verify the person, all right? The actual person is doing this. Verified voter qualifications. So for example, that they're breathing, they have a pulse, and they have legal status, right? And that they are there at the right date and time. Verified voting quality, no more hanging chads and no more dimples. Verified voting quantities. We've heard about multiple ballots, people receiving multiple ballots. Verified voting choice, right? The intended candidate. If you remember back in the Bush v. Gore, there were people who were saying, oh, those people in that county didn't vote for X candidate, they voted for Y candidate. So we are interpreting the intent of the voter. Verified recording. Choice is not falsely withheld in the process. So in other words, all the possible legal, ethical options are available to the voter at the time. And we've seen videos where with these electronic voting machines, that's not always the case. There are instances where either a candidate is withheld or a person votes for a candidate and they can verify in real time that their vote is changed right there before them. And then verified aggregation. Summaries are transparent. We're all looking at the same ledgers, and we're all using the same rules to arrive at the same aggregations. When I say aggregation, it means your tally, your vote count. Okay. So current applications. If you search Guatemala blockchain elections, you'll find an article, how the Bitcoin blockchain is fighting fraud in Guatemala's presidential elections. Guatemala's Supreme Court Election Tribunal is using Bitcoin timestamping to detect fraud attempts in the country's presidential elections. Thanks to open timestamps, a tool created by Bitcoin developer Peter Todd a few years ago, Guatemalan tech startup Simple Proof is able to safeguard key documents about the country's presidential election from fraud and tampering. Todd's tool, which leverages hash functions and the Bitcoin blockchain, is able to timestamp pieces of information and make it easier to spot attempts at fraud and manipulation. Just having the timestamp is so important because we've seen instances where I'll say certain officials have tried to include late votes. Well, go ahead.
Just like in California.
Yep.
Keep on counting.
That's right.
Their candidate marked.
That's right. We saw that in the 2020 election, I think, with Kerry Lake in Arizona, I think it was. They kept going days, weeks afterwards, and before they could get a final tally. All right. So, and by the way, anyone want to guess what the charge is for election tampering? Just take a wild guess. Other than you, Mom.
Jail time.
Treason. It's treason. You're considered to be working against the state at that point. And by the way, I kind of agree with that. If you're deliberately engaging in election tampering, you're working against the people of that state. You're working against the free and fair elections. So now, whatever punishment comes out of that, that's up to each country, right? But that's a whole other thing. Okay, next steps. As I said before, implementing the technology, come up with solutions is, I think, the easier part of this whole thing. It's a matter of changing the cultural will, changing the political will. We have to enact legislation which establishes and enforces standards, which, by the way, we need that regardless of blockchain. We need to lock down the loose ends via technology which enforces transparency. And I recommend all of you just do a search for like Guatemala blockchain elections, and you could do the same thing with just blockchain elections. This is important. It's important to me. I think for everyone who's come here today, I think it's important to all of you. And there, in my opinion, there's no legitimate reason why we should not be looking at this more seriously. that's my presentation. I appreciate you being such a great audience. And I'd like to open up the presentation or the floor to everyone else for questions, comments.
Hey, I have a question.
Yes,
Thank you
ma'am.
for that great presentation, and you're really good with your time, so we'll be able to get everyone off at a good time. What is the probability or the appetite for actually implementing this, especially in elections? It seems like such a no-brainer kind of thing, but what's the pushback and will this ever happen?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mom.
May I say something first?
Go ahead.
In terms of first step, Senator Mike Lee is bringing back the SAVE Act. SAVE Act stands for Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, SAVE Act, and they did not pass it in 2024. So he's bringing that back, and we need time. We need to push the politicians. With that, basically one citizen, one vote. And I think we need to put pressure. And with that, there will be different ways to bring that about. And the blockchain is one of the recommendations by True the Vote. They literally spelled it out.
It just makes sense. It seems like just a great idea. And I don't, but there's a lot of cheaters out there in government and they don't want that. And so.
Yes.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Go ahead.
Aren't all the elections run on a state level really? So it would really have to be on a state by state implementation versus a federal implementation?
So I'm going to give you my bent on that. So yes, you're right. That is true. What I think could happen is the federal government could say, okay, for U.S. elections, whether it be president, representative, Senate, right, that level,
Yeah.
we however you want to vote for your people at your level, that's fine. But we will only accept votes if they meet this set of standards, right? And it doesn't have to be prescriptive in how those standards are met, but just saying, here are the standards, you meet them however you meet them.
I guess my point was, wouldn't it be easier to implement it on, say, an individual state basis? Get Alabama to implement it, and to heck with the other 49 states, they can do anything they want. They can cast paper ballots by their thumbprint.
I think so. I agree with you. Yeah.
Suzanne, you have more knowledge than probably the rest of us on the regulation, how the federal government has made it difficult for the states to, how would I put this? They won't let the states do some things. You
Yes.
do things about federal elections.
Yes. Well, actually, what ended up happening was there's a bunch of legislation in Alabama that was passed that basically says that the only way we can facilitate or administer an election is to make sure that any equipment that's used conforms to what the federal labs put out for us. So we don't actually do our own testing, and there will be pushback if I say that just across the board. They do, I'm going to call it testing light, but the labs, the federal labs that test our equipment, provide a certification on the equipment, and then we get money from the federal government to purchase the equipment that comes from HAVA, which is Help America Vote Act, which is how all these machines got put in place in the first place, and how we keep buying more equipment. It all comes from the federal government for the funding. And then when our Secretary of State, and we have an Alabama election, I forget what it's called, but the electronic, I think it's called Alabama Electronic Voting Commission. And it's a group of people. Secretary of State is a member of it, and then there's several other people that are appointed, and they make a decision on which machines are valid. So it's which technology the counties are allowed to buy. So it goes through, the feds actually certify, but then the state committees certify again by saying, well, these are the ones we accept, but they have to go through that federal lab first. And then the counties look to the Secretary of State and say, which machines did you say are okay for us to purchase? And then they purchase them with federal money. So as you can see, it's all sort of, we like to think that our states are doing their own thing, but so much of it is controlled at a federal level at this point. And does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the point was I would love to see this happen in the future, and I think it will take a long time for the paradigm to shift to people getting on board, but it's not a simple solution in that the feds run a big part of it. In Alabama, 67 counties, they all do elections differently. So, but it does make sense. We should be using blockchain technology to do this. It just makes sense.
Or paper count.
Any last questions? We are at about 2 minutes over our time. Any other questions?
That means non-citizens cannot get one. They
Hey,
cannot get their own vote.
May I put my contact information in the chat? Is that
Yes.
okay?
Sure. And actually, I will put it in the description for those of you who want to access this later or invite someone else to watch. It will be on the Eagle Forum of Alabama YouTube channel. It'll probably take me a day or two to get it up because it's got to download and I got to upload it. But I will, Jay, if it's okay, can I put your email and contact information in the
Yes,
description?
ma'am, absolutely.
Okay. I'll just go ahead and put your bio in there too. Is that
Thank
okay?
you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. The next Huntsville meeting is coming up quickly. Anna, what are the details of that? It's in next week or week after?
21st. And
Actually,
it's
let me hit hold on, wait, stop.